The first time Vivian Mercer told me my family did not belong on our own land. She was standing in front of my truck wearing pearl earrings and holding her nose like the smell of honest work might kill her. 3 nights later, somebody slipped through my east gate and emptied nearly every egg from the smaller hen house. I did not know it yet, but that stolen breakfast was going to end with Vivian being handcuffed in front of 60 people at her own charity brunch. My name is Marcus Hale, and at the time I was running 38 acres outside Millbrook, North Carolina, land my grandfather bought in 1968 after spending most of his adult life harvesting tobacco for somebody else. We had 650 hens, 2 weathered barns, a roadside stand, and a farmhouse that leaned slightly toward the creek whenever the wind got mean. It was not fancy, but it was ours, and in my family, that word carried weight. My wife, Denise, had suffered a stroke 11 months earlier, so my days started around 2 in the morning, turning her carefully so she would not develop sores, helping her drink water, checking the monitor beside the hospital bed we had placed in the living room. Doctors said a facility would be easier, and maybe they were right, but Denise had spent 29 years waking up to those hens and laughing about how they had no respect for weekends. I could not imagine putting her under fluorescent lights where strangers called her room number instead of her name. My father, Walter, had died 7 months before all this started, right there in the old equipment shed, and because he never finished his will, the property was tied up in probate. That made us vulnerable, though I did not fully understand how vulnerable until Vivian moved into the new stone house across the pasture. At first she brought banana bread and said she adored the rustic charm. She said rustic the way some people say unfortunate. A week after my father's funeral, while the flowers were still drying beside our mailbox, she filed a complaint about noise, odor, and possible runoff from the co-ops. The county inspector came out, walked the property, checked the drainage, and found nothing wrong. Vivian smiled when he told her. "Oh, I was never accusing anyone," she said. "I just worry that standards can slip during a family transition." She looked directly at me when she said transition, like grief was a weakness she could measure. Then she started showing up at the Saturday farmers market. One morning she picked up one of my brown eggs, held it toward the sun, and asked loudly whether our health inspections were still current now that my father was gone. My daughter Camille, who was 8 months pregnant and running the cash box, stared at her so hard I thought the egg might crack from pressure alone. Vivian put it down and bought 3 dozen from a white farmer 2 stalls over whose cooler had not closed properly since the first Bush administration. That evening, she posted in the neighborhood group that she had questions about how my family originally acquired such a large parcel. "Probably nothing," she wrote, "just curious." Curious is a useful word when you want to throw a rock and hide your hand. I wanted to answer her publicly, but my father had taught me something important: never wrestle in the mud with somebody who arrived dressed for it. So I requested fresh inspection records, invited the county agricultural office to conduct a voluntary review, and opened the farm to our neighbors. 34 people came. They saw clean copes, healthy birds, organized records, and Denise smiling from the porch. For 2 weeks, Vivian went quiet, and I made the mistake of thinking facts had embarrassed her into stopping. Then one Thursday night, I received notice that she had petitioned the county to review all agricultural operations near new residential development, especially properties going through ownership changes. She never used my name, but everybody in that room knew exactly whose land she meant. That was when I finally understood Vivian was not bothered by the smell of my chickens. She was bothered by the fact that my family owned the ground beneath them. The county meeting took place in a room that smelled like old carpet, burnt coffee, and decisions nobody wanted to be responsible for. Vivian sat in the front row wearing a cream jacket and a smile polished enough to reflect light, with 5 neighbors behind her like she had hired a jury. When public comment opened, she stood and talked about preserving community character, protecting property values, and updating old agricultural arrangements that no longer fit the future of Millbrook. She never said Hale Farm, never said my name, and never mentioned race, but she did not have to. People like Vivian learn early how to sharpen a sentence without leaving fingerprints on it. She asked the board to review farms near new residential developments, especially those caught in probate or operating under what she called legacy ownership. My family had paid taxes on that land for 56 years, but in her mouth, ownership became an arrangement like we were house guests who had overstayed dinner. The board delayed the vote, and afterward an old family friend named Raymond Pike caught me in the parking lot. His father had witnessed my grandfather sign the original deed, and Raymond had worked in county records for 30 years. He knew Vivian was lying, But inside that meeting, he had stared at the floor. That meeting, he had stared at the floor. She's been telling people your father only kept the farm because of government money, he said quietly. I asked why he had not stood up. Raymond rubbed the back of his neck and said, Marcus, I am 70 years old. I do not want to get dragged into something ugly. I looked at him for a long moment and said, Raymond, it was already ugly. You just chose a comfortable seat. That night, I sat beside Denise's bed with my father's Bible open on my knee and seriously considered selling. I was tired, the kind of tired that gets behind your eyes and changes the shape of your thoughts. Then Denise reached across the blanket and touched my wrist with 2 fingers, barely enough strength to move them, and I remembered why I had stayed. The next morning, I found North Carolina's right to farm protections, gathered our inspection records, tax history, and original deed, then sent everything to the county attorney. Vivian's petition was denied 4 days later. She did not take it well. A week after that, she blocked my truck near the east pasture and told me customer traffic from our roadside stand was changing the neighborhood. I offered to put up parking signs. She said signs would not solve the real problem. I asked what the real problem was. Her eyes moved toward a family loading eggs into their minivan, a black father, a white mother, 2 little boys fighting over who got to hold the honey jar. Too many strangers, she said. People who have no connection to this community. They are buying eggs, Vivian. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. Your father understood how to keep things quiet. He did not turn this place into a gathering spot. Maybe you should think about selling before the probate costs swallow you. Developers would pay very well for this land. There it was, finally, not concern, not odor, not traffic, money. When I asked who these developers were, she smiled and said only that responsible people could unlock the property's potential. I told her my grandfather had already unlocked it with 30 years of labor, then drove around her Lexus and went home. That evening she posted that I had behaved aggressively and used threatening language. 2 days later, a deputy arrived asking whether I kept firearms on the property. I cooperated, showed him the barns, the fences, the locked gun cabinet, and asked him to note that no violation or threat had been found. Vivian had discovered that a frightened white woman's phone call could create a permanent file around a black man's name, even when he had done nothing. Then the eggs started disappearing. At first it was 3 dozen, then 5, then nearly 8. My daughter Camille noticed because she kept 2 sets of books, a leather ledger like her grandfather had used, and a spreadsheet that could probably calculate the weight of a chicken's bad attitude. I blamed raccoons. She looked at me and said, Daddy, raccoons do not carry cardboard flats and close the coop door behind them. She bought 2 solar trail cameras and mounted one near the east gate, the other behind the smaller hen house. 10 nights later, we sat at the kitchen table and watched Vivian walk onto our land at 2043 in the morning wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap. She opened the coop without hesitation, loaded 3 flats into a plastic bin, and carried them to her Lexus. We checked the earlier recordings. She had done it 5 times. Then Camille opened Vivian's social media page. There were photos of quiches, lemon meringue pies, and trays of deviled eggs for an upcoming charity brunch, all made with what Vivian called the freshest local ingredients. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because sometimes the nerve of a person becomes too large for anger to hold. Then Camille froze on one photograph. Behind Vivian's wine glass was an open laptop. Camille enlarged the image until the words became readable. The email subject said Hale Property Probate Timeline. The sender worked for Briar Ridge Development. County planning records showed a proposed 68-home subdivision drawn directly over our farm. Vivian was not trying to stop chickens from disturbing her neighborhood. She was trying to erase the farm, replace it with houses, and collect a consulting payment for delivering the land. Camille wanted to call the sheriff immediately, but I stopped her. One grainy video could become a misunderstanding. One stolen flat could become a neighbor borrowing eggs, and Vivian had already learned how to cry before anybody asked the right question. So we built the case properly. We added 2 high-definition cameras spec'd of every file in 3 locations, asked Raymond to hold a copy, and contacted a property attorney named Lena Brooks. Lena watched the footage, studied the development plan, and said, "This is not a neighborhood dispute. This is pressure designed to force a sale." She told us to keep the gate exactly as it was and let Vivian believe she was winning. 3 nights before the brunch, Vivian returned with a storage tub and took nearly 300 eggs in one trip. The camera caught her face, her license plate, the time, and every step she took. That same night, she posted another message questioning whether I was capable of caring for Denise at home. Camille was ready to release everything, but I told her no. We had the theft, the trespassing, the false complaints, and the development plan. But I wanted Vivian's motive in her own words. The next morning, I stood beside the empty coop with the inventory book open, knowing she was watching from across the field, and sure enough, her front door opened. Vivian crossed the field in gardening gloves and an expensive apron, wearing the expression of a woman who had already practiced her innocence in the mirror. "Marcus, I am glad I found you," she said. "Someone has been wandering near our properties at night." I kept my eyes on the inventory book. "Is that right?" She moved closer. "You should be careful, especially with Denise in the house and Camille so close to giving birth." "That was Vivian. She could threaten your family while making it sound like concern." I closed the book and looked at her. "My cameras cover every gate and every co-op, 24 hours a day." Her smile held for half a second too long. "Cameras?" "Yes, 5 visits in 3 weeks, including the 300 eggs taken last night." Her face changed so quickly it was almost impressive. Confusion, calculation, anger, then fear. She said maybe my hens were producing less because I was overwhelmed. Maybe I had lost control of the farm. Maybe grief was affecting my judgment. I told her the county had certified our production records. That was when the careful language disappeared. She pointed toward the house and said my grandfather had been a tobacco worker who somehow ended up with 38 acres and nobody had ever asked enough questions about that. Then she called my father's settlement government charity and said my family had wasted good land for more than 50 years. "This neighborhood could have had a future," she snapped, "before people like you decided an old piece of paper entitled you to hold everyone else back." The field went quiet. Even the birds seemed to understand she had finally said the part she usually wrapped in silk. I looked at her and said, "My grandfather earned this land one bench row at a time. My father defended it in court, and you just explained exactly why you have been trying to take it. Bit off my property." She turned and marched home, never noticing Camille standing inside the equipment shed with her phone raised, recording every word. A second camera had captured the whole confrontation from the fence. Camille came outside shaking. She wanted to post the video immediately, but our attorney had already told us what to do, so we drove straight to the sheriff's office with the recordings, the theft footage, production logs, Vivian's posts, Raymond's statement, and the Briar Ridge development plan. By noon, a judge had signed the warrant. At 4:30 that afternoon, Vivian's charity brunch was in full swing. White tablecloths covered the lawn, string lights hung between the trees, and 60 guests stood around praising her homemade quiches, deviled eggs, and lemon meringue pies. Vivian floated between them with a glass of wine, accepting compliments for food produced by my hens and stolen by her own hands. Then 2 sheriff's cruisers rolled slowly onto the gravel. No sirens, no dramatic chase, just tires crunching toward a woman who had spent months believing the law would only arrive when she called it. Deputy Harris walked through the crowd and told Vivian there was a warrant for her arrest. She laughed at first, then accused me of harassment, then called for her husband, who stood beside the grill holding a pair of tongs like they were the only thing keeping him upright. The deputies led her past the buffet, past the trays of stolen eggs, and past every neighbor she had spent months poisoning against us. One by one, people set down their plates. Vivian received probation, restitution, community service, and a restraining order. The civil case exposed emails proving Briar Ridge had promised her a large consulting fee if she pressured us into selling, so the subdivision collapsed, the probate was completed, and the deed transferred into my name. Vivian sold her house and left town before the year ended. Camille later gave birth to a girl named Ruth, after my grandfather's wife, and I carried that baby to the east gate where Vivian had crossed onto our land 5 times. I told her one generation bought the farm, another defended it, and hers would simply get to live there. Some neighbors apologized. Others claimed they had never believed Vivian, which was not true. But I learned that justice does not always make people honest. Sometimes it only makes them quiet. So tell me what you think. Were the neighbors who stayed silent almost as responsible as Vivian, or is silence understandable when speaking up could make you the next target? Leave your answer in the comments. Share this story with someone who believes property rights only matter when the owner is powerful, and subscribe, because the next case begins with a locked gate, a missing survey marker, and an HOA president who chose the wrong retired judge to threaten.